In this video, we are going to cover two more aspects of nozzle circuit installation, using risers in landscape beds and installing nozzles on trees. We'll cover installation techniques and pass on some hard-earned wisdom from our dealers. Let's talk first about nozzles on landscape risers. The foliage and mulch found in landscape beds provide an ideal place for mosquitoes and other insects to harbor when they rest and hide from the sun. So nozzles on risers installed in the beds can virtually ensure that the mist is making contact with any mosquitoes resting nearby. So in this respect, riser nozzles can be very effective in achieving control. However, as you are planning your riser installation, there are a couple of factors you should consider. The first is plant burn, also known as phytotoxicity, caused by frequent exposure of the plant leaves to the dilute mist. This can usually be managed by avoiding placing the risers too close to the leaves. MistAway sells a short riser and a long riser. If the bed is tall and lush, choose the longer stemmed riser to elevate the nozzle over the landscaping. And try to position nozzles at least 2 feet from foliage. Having said that, some plants are more susceptible than others to leaf burn, particularly those that don't have a waxy coating on their leaves, like azaleas, roses, and foxtail ferns. Try to keep nozzles at least 5 feet from plants like these to avoid burn. Or, if they're your customer's prize-winning roses, 10 feet. Another factor you'll need to take into account is plant growth. You'll need to periodically trim plants away from risers to ensure an effective mist pattern and to prevent leaf burn as the landscaping matures. Now let's talk about installation technique. The first decision you'll need to make is the path for the tubing through the landscape bed and where you'll place the nozzles. If the landscape bed is narrow, a single rank of nozzles should be sufficient to provide coverage. Most of our dealers lay out a path through the middle of the bed, obviously avoiding obstacles like plant root balls and lighting fixtures. But we have a few dealers who run a trunk line at the base of the house or fence and then extend tubing to each riser in the bed. While this is more labor intensive to install, they maintain that it makes locating leaks easier. The next decision you'll need to make is the extent to which you'll protect the tubing in the landscape bed from cuts by burying it. Our dealers' decisions are driven by the construction of the landscape beds and by soil composition, as well as what they experience with respect to tubing cuts and locating leaks, and they vary widely. Some dealers insert tubing into lengths of PVC pipe before burying it. This is the most expensive and time-consuming method for installing risers, but it does protect the tubing against incidental encounters with shovels. However, the PVC sleeve also makes it difficult to isolate and find a leak if there is a cut. The majority of our dealers simply bury the tubing, feeding the risers in trenches, about 3 to 4 inches deep. They have dug with a flat shovel or edge hound. It's faster to install a riser this way, and it's easier to locate a leak than if the tubing is encased in PVC. Finally, other dealers actually just lay the tubing on the soil in the landscape bed and pin it down with a sod staple, then cover it with mulch. This is obviously less labor intensive than burying the tubing. It is also more vulnerable to being cut, but it is much easier to locate a leak. You'll have to experiment to decide which of these methods works best for you and your locale. Once you've decided on the path of the tubing through the bed and how or if you'll bury the tubing, installation is pretty straightforward. No matter which technique you use, you'll need to protect the tubing at its transition into the landscape bed with conduit or funny pipe. It's especially important in installing riser nozzles to prevent dirt from getting into the tubing and fittings. Cap off tubing using a union and plug, and don't put a fitting in the ground unless it's connected to tubing. If you're trenching, use a flat shovel or edge hound to dig a V-shaped trench 3 to 4 inches deep. If you trench at an angle, creating a flap of sod rather than straight down, you'll find it easier to mask the trench. Assemble the riser. You may even want to do this before you come to the job site so that it's easier to keep everything clean. Position the riser in the bed. Lay the tubing or tubing within PVC into the trench and tamp it into the V you created. Cut and connect the tubing to both sides of the T at the bottom of the riser. Take care to ensure you are not creating a kink in the line when you anchor the stabilizer. And don't fill in the trench yet. When the entire nozzle circuit is installed, remove the nozzle tips from the risers and run an inspect cycle on the unit. This will pump clean water throughout. After you flush the riser run, thread on the nozzle tips. Only after you are certain that the nozzle circuit is free from leaks should you fill in the trenches in the landscape bed. Now let's talk about installing nozzles in trees. Trees can offer an installation surface on the perimeter of an area where you don't have other good options, like a fence or a landscape bed. And on large properties, trees can offer installation services for nozzles you need on the interior of the property supplement the nozzles on the perimeter. Most of the dealers we interviewed for this video use tree nozzles only as a last resort. That is, they need nozzles for coverage but have no alternative surface. There are two reasons for this. One, trees grow and the nozzle must be repositioned every year or so. And two, there's something about tubing mounted to trees that attracts squirrels who sharpen their teeth on it and cause leaks. We'll talk about some protective measures you can take. To access a tree, you'll need to trench to it just as you would installing risers. You'll also need to protect the transition from weed whackers at the base of the tree. The tubing should be run up the back side of the tree and secured with clamps. Don't over-tighten the clamps. Very often our dealers will use a tree to mount two nozzles pointed in different directions. If squirrels are a problem, you may want to consider protecting the 1/4-inch tubing with 3/8-inch tubing. The 1/4-inch tubing slides into the 3/8-inch tubing, and you can use 3/8-inch clamps to secure it to the tree. And remember, as you service this system, be sure to inspect and, if necessary, adjust the nozzles every year or so to allow for growth in the tree.